Look what William Carey said. I'm not afraid of failure, I'm afraid of succeeding at things that don't matter. Anything that is not done for God's kingdom and Jesus Christ is lost. Because this world is temporary, we all have to die. And then we will have to enter the eternal realm.
Happiness by J.C. Ryle. An atheist was once addressing a crowd of people in the open air. He was trying to persuade them that there was no God and no devil, no heaven and no hell, no resurrection, no judgment, and no life to come. He advised them to throw away their Bibles and not to pay attention to what preachers said. In the middle of his speech, a poor old woman suddenly pushed her way through the crowd to the place where he was standing. She stood before him. She looked him right in the face. "Sir," she said in a loud voice, "are you happy?" The atheist looked scornfully at her and gave her no answer. "Sir," she said again, "I ask you to answer my question. Are you happy? You want us to throw away our Bibles. You tell us not to believe what preachers say about Christ. You advise us to think as you do and to be like you. Now, before we take your advice, we have a right to know what good we will gain by it. Do your fancy new ideas give you a lot of comfort? Do you yourself really feel happy?" The atheist stopped and attempted to answer the old woman's question. He stammered and shuffled and fidgeted and endeavored to explain his meaning. He tried hard to return to his subject. He said that he had not come to preach about happiness, but it was of no use. The old woman stuck to her point. "Do your fancy new ideas give you a lot of comfort? Do you yourself really feel happy?" She insisted on her question being answered, and the crowd took her side. Finally, the atheist was obliged to leave and sneak off in the confusion. His conscience would not let him stay. He dared not say that he was happy. The old woman showed great wisdom in asking the question that she did. The argument she used may seem very simple, but in reality it is one of the most powerful that can be employed. It is a weapon that has more effect on some minds than the most elaborate reasoning by some of our great apologists. Whenever a man begins to speak against and despise that old-time Bible Christianity, then simply drive home at his conscience the old woman's questions. Ask him whether his new views make him feel at peace within himself. Ask him whether he can say with honesty and sincerity that he is truly happy. The great test of a man's faith and religion is, does it make him happy? Let me now invite every one of you to consider the subject of happiness. Let me warn you not to forget that the salvation of your soul is closely tied together with the subject. The heart cannot be right in the sight of God, which knows nothing of happiness. That man or woman cannot be in the right state of soul who feels no peace within. Let me try to throw a little light on the subject. True happiness is not freedom from sorrow and discomfort. Let that never be forgotten. If it were true, then there would be no such thing as happiness in this world. Such happiness is for angels who have never fallen and not for man. The happiness I am talking about is that kind that a poor, dying, sinful creature may hope to attain. To be truly happy, a man must have sources of happiness which are not dependent on anything in this world. There is nothing on earth which is not stamped with the mark of instability and uncertainty. All the good things that money can buy are but for a moment. They either leave us or we are obliged to leave them. All the sweetest relationships in life are liable to come to an end. Death may come any day and cut them off. The man whose happiness depends entirely on things here below is like him who builds his house on sand. Don't tell me of your happiness if it daily depends on the uncertainties of the earth. Your home may be rich in comforts. Your wife and children may be all that you could desire. Your income may be sufficient to meet all of your needs. But oh, remember this. If you have nothing more than this to look to, then you are standing on the edge of a cliff. Your joy may be deep and earnest, but I fear it will be short-lived. It is not true happiness. A man of humor and pleasure will be our next witness, Lord Chesterfield. He will speak for himself. His own words from a letter will be his testimony. Listen to him. I have seen the silly cycle of business and pleasure, and have no use for any of it. I have enjoyed all the pleasures of the world, and consequently know their futility, and do not regret their loss. I appraise them at their real value, which in truth is very low. However, those who lack experience always overrate them. They only see their outer joy and are dazzled with their glare, but I have seen behind the scenes. I have seen all the rough pulleys and dirty ropes which present and move the gaudy machine, and I have seen and smelled the foul odor of the burning lard candles which illuminate the stage and its scenery, to the astonishment and admiration of the ignorant audience. When I reflect on what I have seen and what I have heard and what I have done, I cannot persuade myself that all that superficial, hurried movement and pleasure of the world had any reality. I look on all that is past as one of those romantic dreams which the opium drug can bring about, and I do by no means wish to take any more drugs in order to repeat the fleeting dream. How many of our greatest men have died of broken hearts, disappointed, disgusted after constant failure? How many have left on record some humbling confession that in the abundance of their power they were grieving for rest, just like the caged eagle grieved for liberty? How many whom the world is applauding as masters of the situation are in reality little better than galley slaves, chained to the oar and unable to get free? Yes, there are many sad proofs, both among the living and the dead, that to be great and powerful does not bring about happiness. Come and stand with me some afternoon in the heart of the city of London. Let us watch the faces of most of the wealthy men whom we will see leaving their places of business at the close of the day. Some of them are worth millions. But what is written in the faces of these grave men whom we see swarming out from the Bank of England and from the Stock Exchange? What is the meaning of those deep lines which wrinkle their cheeks and their foreheads? What is the meaning of the anxious expressions which is worn by 5 out of every 6 we meet? Yes, these things tell a serious tale. They tell us that something more than gold and banknotes is needed to make men happy. Come next and stand with me near the House of Parliament, in the middle of a busy session. Let us scan the faces of the politicians, whose names are familiar and well known all over the civilized world. There you may see on some fine evening the mightiest statesmen in England hurry into a debate like eagles to a carcass. Each has the power of good or evil in his tongue, which is fearful to contemplate. Each may say things before tomorrow's sunrise which may affect the peace and prosperity of nations and upset the world. There you may see the men who presently hold the reins of power in government. There you may also see the men who are daily watching for an opportunity of snatching those reins out of their hands and governing in their stead. But what do their faces tell us as they rush to their post? What may be read in many of their wrinkled foreheads? They teach us a solemn lesson. They teach us that something more is needed than political greatness to make men happy. Come next and walk with me through some quiet country village in merry old England. Let us visit some secluded corner far away from the great cities and fashionable indulgence in political strife. There are many such villages to be found in the land, where there is work for all the laborers, and a church for all the population, and a school for all the children, and a minister of the gospel to look after the people. Surely you will say, we will find happiness here. Surely such places must be the very abodes of peace and joy. Go into these quiet-looking cottages, one by one, and you will soon be shocked. Learn the private history of each family, and you will soon alter your mind. You will soon discover that backbiting and lying and slandering and envy and jealousy and pride and laziness and drinking and extravagance and lust and petty quarrels can murder happiness in the country quite as much as in the town. No doubt a rural village sounds pretty in poetry and looks beautiful in pictures. But in sober reality, human nature is the same evil thing everywhere. Yes, we need something more than a home in a quiet country village to make a child of Adam a happy man. Mankind's determination to find happiness where happiness cannot be found. Century after century, wise men have left on record their experience about the way to be happy. Century after century, the children of men will declare that they know the way to happiness perfectly well and need no one to teach them. They throw our warnings to the winds. Are you a young person? I plead with you to accept the tender warning of a minister of the gospel and not to seek happiness where happiness cannot be found. Don't seek it in riches. Don't seek it in power and position. Don't seek it in pleasure. And don't seek it in education. All these are bright and splendid fountains. Their waters taste sweet. A crowd is standing around them, which will not leave them. But oh, remember that God has written over each one of these fountains this statement: everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. Remember this, and you will be wise.
So my mom would take us to church ever since I was born. And I can remember when I was about 5 years old, I didn't know the gospel or anything, but I was literally terrified one night that my father would go to hell. And so I braved walking this dark hallway, and I woke him up and told him he needed to be saved. But I didn't even know what that meant. Years went by. I was a fairly good kid, but I was not converted. I always had a fear of God. When I was 17, my father, who was a very strong, stern man that I greatly respect, we were working out we raised cattle, Charolais cattle and quarter horses. We were working out, putting up a fence and talking about that year's, I played basketball, and he was real excited about my senior year, and we were rolling out wire, and all of a sudden he just screamed and he started to fall, and I grabbed him, and he just died of a heart attack. And at that moment, for the next 3.5 years, 4 years, I lived like a hellion. And so many people would say, well, you know, he went through such a trauma, and they would feel sorry for me. But the reality of it was simply this: my father's death gave my flesh an excuse to live in sin. And I did. The most self-centered, wicked person. I finally transferred to the University of Texas because I wanted to be an oil and gas lawyer. And when I went to the apartment complex that I had a room in, I kept seeing these young men, and they were amazing. They were, you know, one of them was going to be a fighter pilot, they were all athletes, and they just seemed clean. I didn't know what it was about them. They were amazing, but they were clean. And they began to share with me the gospel. And then one day, there's a lot to the story, but just to get to the punchline, one day I was in the undergraduate library in the copy room running off some oil and gas surveys with one of the teams that I worked with, a mock competition between oil companies. And a girl came up to me and said, I'm having a party Friday, why don't you come? And I had gotten to the point where I didn't go to parties or anything. I was 21, and I would just go into a tavern and sit there with old men and drink and stumble home. And I said, I'm not coming to your party. And she said, why? And I don't even know why I said it. I wasn't thinking, I just said it. I said it because I'm a Christian now, and I'm going to follow Jesus. And even my friends that knew me kind of turned around and said, they looked at me and they said, you know, that's even low for you. And it was like a cartoon. You've seen when a light bulb goes off. And it just seemed like, I mean, I knew I was a sinner, but it just seemed like I was utterly engulfed in the love of God. That God loved me. I mean, just joy unspeakable and full of glory. And I ran back to the dorm. I was scared. I didn't know what happened. I felt like, so I found this guy who had been witnessing to me, and I said, I need help. Something happened to me. And he said, what's wrong? And I said, I don't know. I'm not the same person I was that walked in that library. I'm different. I love God. And so he, to end the story, he took me downstairs to the RA, who was kind of the oldest Christian. Big Texan, about 6'5". And I knocked on the door and he said, what's up? And I said, I don't know. All I know is I wasn't loving God, and now I love Jesus Christ. And to end the story, he just looked at me and goes, buddy, you just got born again. And that's what he said. So stories from there.